everybody. Welcome to this issue of USA Wrestling's Moments Off the Mat. My name is Mike Clayton. I manage your National Coaches Education Program. And today we're joined with Joan Fulp and Andrea Yamamoto. Welcome to the show.
This could go a lot of different directions, and I think people want to see it.
If there are any two people that I would like to free-form a conversation with, you two are it.
There is no topic that is off limit. We cannot go too deep. We can get really out there if we need to, or we can just bring it all back to basics, like my cheetah cub cam at the Smithsonian, which is my thing right now.
How did you get to the point where you're fighting so hard for the sport of wrestling? If you could maybe fill our listeners in on your path.
Ooh, go Joan.
Wow.
Well, Joan's been on an advocating path for women in sports for a very long time, not just
a very long time. Yeah. So 2 daughters that started wrestling, but a husband that before my daughters were even, ready to wrestle, little ones, he had women that wanted to wrestle, and he always encouraged them. But a step before that was he was world and Olympic coach, and when we met, I was a gymnast, and I went into a practice. I was at Central Michigan University coaching and teaching, and I said, you guys don't know what you're doing. You don't know how you're not stretching right, et cetera. And so we kind of made that connection. But I think for me, the biggest thing was it didn't matter what world team camp we were in. He would go to that group of guys and say, she's doing your gymnastics and she's doing your flexibility. And he had no hesitancy and just walked away. It's like, this is what we're doing. He didn't bring it up. He didn't say, is this okay? I have this female that's going to do this. This is her area of expertise. So Lee was always open for any woman to come in. He did a lot of martial arts at Skyline College, where he taught for many years. So the natural progression into the wrestling was just a part. So it was for him, it was always open the door, whatever your skill level is, it doesn't matter. Let's open that door to the next level of what you could do in the sport of wrestling. Another piece of that passion is just watching my own daughters who started wrestling in probably late mid-90s, somewhere in there when they started wrestling, just the lack of opportunities, even though we were pushing for that. And Lee was trying to get probably in 1990, 91, 92, trying to get local tournaments to have a girls division. And many times 4 girls would show up and nobody had the same, weight class to be able to compete against each other, but it still was how we started. And the other piece is just knowing how much we had to push to get it accepted. I can still remember, I'll tell this quick story, sitting in a gym in Vallejo, California. It was our unofficial championship for California high schools. And we're so packed in this gym. We're sitting shoulder to shoulder, and there were 2 guys to my right, and they said, wow. They said, well, the girls are starting to, have some skill now. They actually look like they can, wrestle each other, and they're learning something. And the other guy said, yeah, but there's one thing the girls will never have that the boys have. And the other guy said, yeah, what's that? He goes, they'll never have heart. So at that point, I had to kind of, shoulder to shoulder, kind of interject my own thoughts on that. And they weren't happy. They were not happy. The guy pretty much walked away and didn't want to hear from me. So, it's been a long journey. We all have had those many experiences. And I have to say, for my daughters, their high school was very positive experiences overall, but we still had to battle. We still had to fight for all girls tournaments and to get to those tournaments and to build those teams. So that's kind of been my introduction, and it just fell in for Andrea and I. We were on a call with Kira Berry probably in, end of 2015, 2016 maybe. And she said, we got to build girls wrestling at the high school level. And we just kind of went, we'll do that. Yeah, we can do that. So we just started, probably in that early months of 2016, just talking and gathering information and deciding, the pathway that we would take to, and it just evolved. It just evolved. And I don't know, I get excited talking to people about wrestling and talking to people about what's happening in girls wrestling and what they can do to create these opportunities, because for my daughters, 2 daughters that have wrestled now for 20 years, I just see the excitement and the love that they have, and they continue both to support and help grow the sport. You know, it's just part of our lives through my husband's years in love of, you know, providing opportunities for men and women to enjoy the sport that he so loved.
I'm the very lucky recipient in high school of having a phenomenal high school coach, Dave Bennett, for anyone watching who knows Dave Doc Bennett. I think I'm incredibly fortunate to experience someone say, okay, you're going to turn out for wrestling. This is the mid 80s. Okay. You know, to be able to be a part of wrestling, and, you know, just kind of going back to girls in the sport and a parent that might be worried it's aggressive and brutal and all this. This sport spoke to me like no other sport ever did. And I did a lot of sports, but it is that physicality and those physical challenges and those skills challenges and all these things that you get to focus and concentrate on. It was so addicting. It is the only sport that really felt like I was me and that I could express myself in all of my ways, including, you know, being someone who likes, you know, perhaps a more physically aggressive sport. And I think when I was competing in wrestling and I was learning and all the experiences I had with Team USA at that time, and meeting Joan and Lee, you know, very early on back in that time, you know, it was just such a great period of time in my life. And to start to see the light bulbs go off in some of our leaders and see them say, oh, and start to take off a little bit, right? And so then flash forward to, when Joan and I met, and it's addicting to help people realize how great girls wrestling is. It is addicting to see a coach have that awakening, and then boom, they're off and running and they're recruiting 30 girls, and that coach is got some new life, you know, in his or her coaching life. It's all full of possibilities now. It's all full of, look at how big a team we can have. It's oh my gosh, my girls team became state champions at my school, where it's either they were never able to have that experience yet in their program on their boys' side. And so it is really addicting to see growth after growth, experience after experience, to see that continue happening. And it's a real pleasure, honestly, to be able to help these people that are, it's their momentum. Everything that we're seeing, USA Wrestling state chapters, high school growth, I'm very happy to be able to play a part, but this is their momentum. This is grassroots wrestling at its best. We are seeing some of our great wrestling leaders now really step up in our sport and support girls wrestling, and that becomes then better for all. You know, we're really into wrestling for all right now, and we've had, you know, people that have been hesitant that have now stepped in, and look at what we are accomplishing as a wrestling community. So, you know, it's very addicting to see these things still, you know, each time it happens, I'm like, yes, because they're having that really wonderful experience. And that's what I had in high school, and that's what I had with Team USA, great experience after great experience. And I want that for people. And if I can play any part at all, small, large, whatever it is, I'm really happy to be able to support those people.
Why is wrestling so important as a sport, as a tool to develop our young people? Why is this sport so important as that tool?
Well, I'll jump in real quick on that. As a physical educator, I think the sport is important, totally sports for women in general, right? So we're providing more opportunities for those girls to develop discipline and leadership, the teamwork qualities, mental toughness through any sport that they engage in. But when we look at wrestling and we look at the high school, you know, sports, they don't have much chance to participate in a combat sport. They could go outside in the private sector, but that eliminates, you know, so many of our young, you know, youth boys and girls, because it's a private sector, there's cost, there's parent involvement, etc. So wrestling has become a really important piece for all those young ladies who would love to be a part of that, combat sports scene. So I think that's, a big piece of it. But the other part for women to become involved in wrestling, Mike, we know now that moms are the ones more and more deciding what sport their children are going to participate in, whether it's their young boys or their young girls. So you have them, if they are involved in wrestling now, look at how that will open the door, not only for women, but for men to come in, or young boys and girls to come into our sport. So that is important, to increase the number of coaches, increase the number of officials, to increase what we know is happening at every high school level and college level, administrators that are women that have been involved in wrestling. They're going to then advocate and open the door as well. So I think those are, some important factors on that. And moms and dads, Andrew, we talked about this yesterday, moms and dads can now open the door and drop kids off to wrestling for both their kids. It's no longer my daughter's going to dance. Oh my gosh, I got this schedule. My son's going over here to softball or baseball or whatever, but they can drop both off at the same room. They can participate together, generally at the same time. So those are some important things for me, but just another opportunity for women in general to have a wider base of sports to choose from to participate in.
I think wrestling is uniquely designed to help girls realize that they are enough in everything that they do. There are so many challenges and hurdles in wrestling from the very beginning as a beginner all the way through as they become more skilled and more accomplished wrestlers. But with all of those challenges, girls are learning that they are enough, whether they're a state champion or whether they're a runner-up or just a participant. I think our sport really helps girls to understand their worth and their value, to help them understand their power, to help them understand the things that are uniquely female about them that are not weaknesses but are strengths, and that our community, our world needs those girls to feel empowered about the things that make them uniquely female, so that when they go out and back into our communities and jobs, as parents, as educators, as law enforcement, whatever it is they're choosing, they do feel empowered. And I think our sport does a great job of helping girls and women to feel powerful, to feel capable, to know that they, our sport is what I call a high fail sport. You fail a lot. Even if you win your match, there's areas where you failed. One of the things I think we're good at, and one of the things I think wrestling has to hold on, is preserving failure for learning and for growth. And I think girls are getting a lot of benefit out of that. And I think, we've always known that boys have benefited so much in character building, so that when they do take the next step in their life, whatever that step is, and those natural challenges come, they're so prepared. They have tools and they have things that they can use that they learn in wrestling. Or we're such a great community. Preserving community is so important. Those boys have been able to call up their old coach and say, hey, I'm going through something, or, what should I do? And so, we want girls to have that same benefit. And they are getting that benefit. We're seeing, more and more girls in media talk about what this sport is doing for them. I think that, coaches right now have a real ability to take all the talents and skills that they have, and they've affected change positively in kids on the boys' side, and now they're going to be able to do that on the girls' side as well. I think long-term, having girls in our sport, for the stability, the long-term stability of our sport and just our longevity, we want a large seat at the table when it comes to decision-making about sports. So when we're making decisions about sports in youth organizations or after-school organizations, if we're making decisions in our school district level or college level, we want wrestling to not just have a seat, but we want to take a lot of space up at that table. And now when we can sit down at the table and talk about why you should have wrestling as a program, or why we should have wrestling as a college program. We're coming now with men and women. We want to be a more sizable presence, and I think having, you know, girls is and women in wrestling is really going to help us move forward long term. I think men's wrestling can't keep propping up the sport on its own. I think we need women, so that, you know, we do have that large presence when we're making decisions about what sports we're going to include, you know, in our institutions.
And we've seen this before when we lost wrestling in the Olympics, right? We didn't just get wrestling back because everybody said, "Oh, wrestling, you're cool. You've been around a while. Come on back in." Like, we had to prove something. We learned there. How does that apply now in this new environment and the new challenges that we're facing now?
I think Andrea kind of hit the nail on the head with what she just said. You know, women are now that next sector. We have women that are involved in the sport, and instead of looking at it as solely a men's sport, you have more institutions that are looking for ways to, you know, increase their numbers of women that are involved, and especially in sports. So I think that's going to be the same as the Olympics. You know, the women are there. We need to include them. We need to have equal opportunity. So I think that's you know, the bottom line is when you have a sport that shows both interest in the number of people that are going to come to college for that sport, the number of people that are now going to participate in the high school level for that sport. I think that's just, you know, you can't help but say as an administrator, hey, we can't lose the sport. Look how many students we have involved. Look at the value of this sport. So I think that's an important piece of keeping sports at the high school level and increasing the numbers as well.
And we're expanding. You know, it's a lot of other sports that, you know, they're still trying to grow their numbers and increase participation, but we are in such a period of expansion right now. I think it really makes us appealing to institutions, to corporate sponsors, to people that we're trying to buy in. We can say, look at everything that we're doing right now. Look at how we're expanding. Look at how we're supporting, you know, women's wrestling and men's wrestling. I think we are now becoming a more appealing product when it comes to how we partner with businesses or organizations or foundations or people that we have been trying to invite into the wrestling family, but perhaps have had a difficult time. I think girls and women are helping to reshape what people think a wrestler is, what they think our sport is, and that I think is helping us to reach populations and demographics that probably never would have given us a chance, or we've had a really hard time reaching out to them and getting them engaged. So I think everything that we're doing with youth girls wrestling right now, inviting more girls into wrestling practice, like Joan is saying, where mom can take, you know, 5-year-old Rebecca and 10-year-old, you know, Tom to practice, is very appealing right now. What we're doing, we're seeing in these, you know, the middle school and high school space with all of that growth, the kind of opportunities that are expanding and being, we look so much more appealing to athletic directors in high schools right now, many of which were not wrestlers, you know, and so, you know, our sport, you know, is gaining a stronger, you know, appeal to those institutions, and we keep going up to, you know, USA Wrestling. Think of all of the businesses or groups out there that we can now be more appealing to, because we can say, you're focused on women, look at what we're doing for women, how can we partner and join forces? So again, this expansion is going to help us in all these different places where we need to keep a foothold, not just for the now, but for the future. I think, you know, how many other sports are growing the way we're growing right now? And everything that we're doing very creatively on the women's side, I think we're starting to see people realize some of this creative and out of the box thinking for growing girls and women's wrestling. How can we apply that to what we're doing on the boys' side, so that we can turn around this kind of direction where we've been losing numbers. How can we start, applying some of that thinking to the boys' side, because we want our boys' numbers going up too. We don't want to be kind of a victim of the sports community where we're losing, particularly in high school. We want to see our boys' high school numbers come up. We want to see our collegiate institutions bring back men's wrestling. So I think that there is a lot of good overlap and benefit to everyone when girls wrestling is growing.
It sounds like men and women really should be focused on being on this journey together because of the benefits, right? There's no negatives to this. There's only benefits for each side, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Ian McDonald, who's up in Canada, wrote a great piece back in, oh my gosh, I think it was either the late 80s or 90s, where he said once he added girls wrestling to his high school program, he said that visual of those wrestlers as those kids over there, those sweaty kids in that room with gnarly ears and cutting weight, he said it totally changed. He said when the women came in, he said the administration looked at them differently. The student population looked at wrestling with a different view. So I think that's a really important piece. I love what he wrote about that. It was a great article.
There's probably still some naysayers. Is that a fair word to use? Somebody might be watching this saying, I don't know that I agree. What do we tell them, and where do we go from here for those folks? How do we get them to see this other perspective of wrestling as a whole unit, and let's grow everything together?
For me, and I was asked that question recently, for me, a large percentage of the growth that we now see at the high school level with girls has been because those coaches' minds have been changed. And once those male coaches' minds are changed, I think that's going to carry over to the other male coaches that say, not in my room, not today, wasn't paid to coach girls. But I think those coaches are going to be the example for each other. I think that's going to, carry a lot of weight because the growth has been so rapid and the minds that have been changed. The stories are phenomenal. The other end is once that girl walks in the room and really has to prove herself, we know it's happening, and we know the girls are still going to walk in the room regardless of the challenges they face, regardless, I always say, of the welcome mat barely being visible. But many times it's going to be those young ladies as well that change the mind of that one coach. But I just see the coach's path right now is they're excited, they're thrilled, they're having fun, they're winning state titles and state championships as a team, they're recruiting, they see the excitement of it all, and they're loving it. They're loving it. It is a new dimension for these male coaches to go into. But I think they're going to be the biggest advocates right now to get more of our coaches that haven't been involved, haven't had girls on the team, to be the great example of this is the place to be, and now is the time. Now is the time to invite these young ladies in and really make a loud noise for our sport, really sound the trumpets.
If I'm a male coach and maybe I'm buying in, but I just don't really know how to start, where do I go?
Where do I go for resources? Where do I go to?
Maybe even emotionally, where do I go? Because some of my buddies don't buy into it, but I agree. My daughter's growing up, and she should have the same opportunity to learn from the sport that I've learned from. And so maybe I'm starting to get through some of that negative thinking, and I'm coming around, but I just don't know the first steps. And resources for sure are a great place to go. But if you had to just say, just do this, like to get the ball going.
I love a comment by a coach in, I think it was Kansas years ago, where his daughter said, "Hey, Dad," because his son wrestled, he was all in, this was a sport. "My daughter wants to do what? You want a what?" And she just said, "Dad, don't be a dream stealer." So maybe that line, just don't be a dream stealer, just let it happen. Don't have too many, should not, can't, won't, let those drop off and just think about that. Don't be a dream stealer for an athlete. Look at these young boys and girls as athletes, not this is a girl and this is a boy, but as athletes. So Don't steal that dream. Yeah. See if you can guide and direct, just like you do with the boys. You want the best for them. You want them to learn the skills. They can step back and just realize that they can have the same wonderful results with a young lady in that room as well. So just don't be a dream stealer.
Coaches, people in leadership positions that have hesitancy, what do we teach our athletes about that? I don't think I can do this, coach, or I'm afraid about something, or I'm not quite sure that's right. With our athletes, we're challenging them on that. Why do you think that? Why do you think you're not enough? Why do you think that you're not good enough to be in this match? Why do you think you can't? I think as coaches, we too have to go to uncomfortable places, and we have to challenge that voice in my head that says this is uncomfortable, or I don't know. And if there's hesitancy about getting involved in girls wrestling, we have to do a little introspective examination of where does this really come from? Where is this really coming from? Is this really true? These things I'm thinking, and get back to, why do I love this sport? Do I love the sport just because of boys? No, I love the sport for all the things that we get as character building, all the things we get in community, all the things that we get in, all the really, really good stuff and all the really hard stuff. So I think if we can just remind coaches, tell me what you love about the sport, and get back to sharing that with every kid that you come across, and realize that, one of the things I tell coaches is that your gifts that you were born into this world with, your love of being with kids and teaching kids, and then all of the skills that you have acquired in working with kids, right? That those are not reserved for just half the population. And that there are girls in your community, walking the halls of your schools, that will thrive under your leadership, under your skills, and under your kind of just God-given natural gifts and talents that you were given, and that those need to be shared with as many students as you can get in front of you. And, we all want the kids to be successful in their wins and in their, reaching the podium, and those things are nice, but at the end of the day, remember why you got in the sport. It's to help those kids become better citizens, better individuals, become a great family member when it's their time to be a parent, if that's what they choose, to be, great in their role in their job, to be great community members. And we use the sport of wrestling as a tool to help them develop that. And so any hesitancy about girls wrestling, get back into who you are as a mentor, get back into what you believe the sport offers, and that you want to share that with as many people as possible.
I just got goosebumps.
Yeah.
I mean, this is,
Andrea can do that.
You guys had talked a lot about the environment and how coaches are contributing to that environment. That if we just look at our values, why we love the sport, then we can translate that, to both genders, so we can include everybody. Maybe I'm concerned about the physicality, right? Maybe I'm a parent and I have just boys, and I'm concerned about the physicality, or I have just girls, or I wonder how boys and girls wrestling together works. And you two have done so much for our sport, period. How does this physicalness that wrestling requires for people who aren't really comfortable yet with that physicality, how do we address that as a sport? And then when we get into boys and girls training together, sometimes out of necessity as we continue to grow, I know as you talk, you say, we don't want boys and girls training together ideally. We want girls training with girls and boys training with boys, and it's a great opportunity. And when it makes sense to overlap, we do that too. But where do we talk about the physicality of the sport?
Yeah. Are you talking more, Mike, about the outside of wrestling people looking at our sport?
Or people, yeah, people that are like, I like what wrestling instills. I like that there's some values and the work ethic, and I have no problem with that. But I'm not a touchy person. Our family doesn't hug. We don't. I'm just not there, and I don't know how I can be there in a sport like wrestling. And for the coaches that are established, who are comfortable, how do they understand that the people who aren't yet comfortable can still be a part of our sport? They just need time to get there.
In some ways, our society is still challenged by I don't know if this is a good word to use, but I've used it before, how brutal the sport can be, even though I think wrestling is less brutal than most of the other combat sports, totally. But I think, especially for women, and when you see the black eyes and you see the cuts and you see the scrapes, and I had a friend recently look at a picture of my daughter with a busted eye and black underneath, and they go, I could not have my daughter participate in a sport where she might end up looking like that, where that might happen to her. It was just almost a gasp of how can you deal with that, Joan? I keep thinking about those young kids, those young children who we know have a lot of energy, and they just need a place to put that energy into a sport. And it's not baseball where you're standing around the outfield waiting to catch a ball or waiting to bat. It's a sport where they're physically totally involved, and it's wrestling. We know people are constantly saying, for that kid, who is just on that upper end of high activity level, they need wrestling, they need that sport. And sometimes they can be drawn in by the values that gives, especially as a very young, student. Coaches, parents, teachers can say, hey, I think you need to be in wrestling. Why don't you give it a try? So I think sometimes that can open the door. And once they get in and see it, and see what it does for their child, and see that it's not this, punch and kick and hit and, bruises, that it's real skill and agility and just the great time the kids have playing all the games and being active and upside down and rolling and turning and twisting. I think that can open the door for some people. Maybe at the high school level, it'll be a little more challenging, especially, again, I look at the women and look at parents and brothers and people who say, not for my daughter. Or a young athlete will say to me, I said, are you going to go out for wrestling? Yeah, but my parents say no, because it is a very physically demanding sport. And I think right now we still have a strong visual that says girls are wrestling boys. And this whole, importance is that a girl can beat a boy. And Andrea and I are both shifting so far away from that and trying to come up with some really important cues and ideas for people to understand why we need to separate and why we need to move away from that model that still gets a lot of attention. We've watched that for years and years. Except for the last year, I would say, before that, the attention was whenever a girl beat a boy. That was the media article, that was the news article, that was the TV came out. So I think sometimes that image is still out there for so many of people looking in at wrestling, because that's the one article they may read about or see, publicized in the media. So we've got to kind of move away from that. But I think this day and age, it's not this year, we've had so much growth in the last 2 years. It's almost overwhelming. And the amount of media that we have now seen on the girls' states that are having unofficial or official championships really is huge. So I think we're truly moving away from that, but it's still there. I think that concern is still there.
Before I answer that, I was just going to say, the aggression and physical contact in wrestling, it's not brutality for just brutality's sake. It is a controlled aggression for the sake of, it is a context where but like Joan said, we can't just do anything we want out there. There are rules for safety. We try to preserve the health and welfare of athletes so that they do make it out of matches without injury. We want them to have great competitive matches. We want our winner or loser, and we want the kids to walk off the mat, and we want them to wrestle again. So our sport's not interested in, brutality for brutality's sake. It is a contact sport. And so it naturally requires a type of physicality that people can misinterpret as, extreme or without rules. But in fact, we are so focused on skills, skill building, skill precision, position, strategy. And so I think when we're dealing with someone who's interested in wrestling, we have to stay focused on skill building, skill precision, skill consistency, and strategy, and all the other things that are happening. And if someone's thinking about doing wrestling but they're not sure, and this is so foreign to me, and some of our darker stereotypes in the sport of wrestling, like weight cutting and things like that, this is where our sport, and again, girls, I think the introduction of girls and the growth of girls are really challenging the wrestling community about, yeah, we really got to change some of our thought processes and some of the way we do things in some of these areas. So I think girls are also helping to pick us up out of some of our darker stereotypes. And you don't have to be you don't have to be a brute or a super aggressive person to do well in our sport. It's a combination of a lot of things to do well in our sport. But I think if in the wrestling community, we are going to attract those people and put their minds at ease if we continue to focus on, we are a skill building, skill precision, skill consistency sport. We're also strategy. We're talking about great nutrition. I love how our sport is starting to talk about food and nutrition, organic and healthy and whole foods and foods for performance instead of, I didn't eat anything for the last 3 days. So how we're talking about hydration and how our athletes are talking about the things. And so I think we have a lot of things to bring to the table now in the present, kind of wrestling environment to help put some minds at ease about aggression and things like that. As far as, the girl boy situation, for such a long time, stretching back to the early 90s, the only way for a girl to participate in the sport was to train with boys and compete against boys. And, it was like, it's kind of the ultimate ultimatum, either wrestle boys or don't wrestle at all. So we have had thousands of girls over the last 30 years. Many, it's just one girl walking the room. Jen and I call her the one courageous girl. We've had thousands of one courageous girls walk into wrestling rooms across the nation for 30 years. And what happened was, in my opinion, is that as these girls walked in and stayed and kept up and didn't quit and found success on the mat, right? When we talk about finding success, we're getting takedowns, maybe we're getting pins, maybe we're getting wins. So who were they finding success against? They were finding success against not just an opponent, but it was male opponents. So we talk about that visual and the packaging, and then we go into some of the social dynamics of boys are supposed to be the standard, the highest, the model, the best. And if girls are competing well or successfully without realizing, we have created a kind of a culture of, wow, girls, that girl must be so tough. She must be so amazing. She's beating boys. We are continuing to make boys this high standard. So we keep feeding girls into that standard. And it's a hard thing to step back and say, you know what? As a female, my greatest competitors, the people that are going to challenge me the most, are not my male competitors. They're my female competitors. Adeline Gray, all the other women on our senior, our world team, they are competing at the very highest level, and they are winning and losing against great female competitors. And so we have a lot of work to do in wrestling to make this cultural shift to help girls and women realize that you don't need to wrestle boys in order to feel a great sense of accomplishment or to feel that you have, you've reached a pinnacle. We really need to shift them into my female competitors will be my toughest and best competition every single time. Now, when we have girls that are winning state titles in a boys state championship, and it receives all of that attention, it's just cultural. It's still that man versus woman, a setup, going all the way back to perhaps Billie Jean King and her iconic, tennis match. And, we still as a society have a lot of work to do. And we definitely, this becomes hyper in sports. When I see those, I try to step out of that boy versus girl. And I just say, wow, look at her. She had to wrestle very consistently in all of her matches to get to the finals and to win. I try to bring it back to, what would I say if it was a boy against a great competitor? It's the same thing. Wow, great consistency. She got to all of her attacks. She did a great job. So I just try to step back, but we're going to get out of the boy and girl dilemma by creating girls versus girls competition at youth level, at high school level, by creating teams, by working on girls high school championships, by creating more girls versus girls competition and teams at the youth level. And we will change this kind of sticky, cultural dilemma that we've had in wrestling.
It's great. So if I'm an outsider looking to get my kids into wrestling and I'm hearing this, I'm thinking, okay, like I'm good now. Like I can buy in.
Come on in.
I can start this up. Where do we need to go from here?
So tournaments, whether it's a girls division, a larger boys tournament that you're putting on, or standalone, we say a standalone tournament where it's only girls that come into that event. Those are important. And the bigger piece is it's very important for them not to be discouraged by low numbers as they start. Now, phenomenon-wise, in California, when we started with girls high school tournaments within the scholastic system, we had, starting maybe in 2000, 2001, we had 3 to 4 tournaments during the season. Well, that grew. In about 8 years, everybody decided to have a tournament. So, that may water down the numbers a little bit as more and more tournaments pop up. Everybody's going, I'm going to run a girls tournament. Maybe I can make some money here. But I think being aware of what your offering is across your state, maybe through your USA Wrestling, organization within that state, saying we're going to make sure we have a division in these 3 larger tournaments, and we're going to make sure we have one standalone tournament for the girls. However, and that really is so dependent on that organization. They know their population best, but for them to put those programs together and just not be discouraged by low numbers, offer those opportunities for girls. It will grow and it will get better. Every time they have a meeting, and we have said this now for 4 years, girls wrestling needs to be at the top of the agenda, not at the very bottom where there's 5 or 6 people that have got to go already and we're not really interested. You've got to have girls wrestling on that agenda and really give it the time it deserves to talk about how you can grow it, what's happening in your clubs, advice for club owners, etc. Visuals. If you have a tournament and there are only a few girls in that tournament, please don't put them in the back room on that far back mat. Make sure they're up front. And I still contend we are our own worst enemies when it comes to promoting our sport. You need to have somebody that's on the microphone that talks about what's happening, that talks about, we're going to put this match out in front. We're going to have these young ladies here, and please, put your attention to the mat and understand what's happening in wrestling. Lee, my husband Lee Allen, and I, one thing we did at every girls tournament for years as it was growing in California, we had a list of every high school tournament, but we also included every USA Wrestling tournament, whether it was state or national. We gave them the whole layout of everything they could be involved in. And then every time, you know how it is on the tournaments, you're going to have a little dead time at some point where everybody's waiting for that, amount of time before you can put that next match out. Lee would always get on the microphone and talk to parents about what's happening, how girls wrestling is growing, what they needed to do as parents if they didn't have a coach that was really supportive, how they could get those young ladies to the event. So I think it's just a matter of really promoting and getting the visual out there. The other piece of that I've talked with several people about, when you have a girls or when you have a boys clinic or a camp in the summer, there's usually a line that says girls included, etc. Now that's getting better. We are, like I said, this past year that has changed immensely. But what we need to see at those clinics are girls clinicians, and not just one girl, and not just looking at what national team member could I call USA Wrestling and get a national team member here. You have girls in your state, high school girls that are doing well. Maybe you have a college nearby. We need to pull those young ladies into these positions of leadership. We need to give them the opportunity so that when we now need coaches, they say, yeah, I did 2 or 3 clinics. You know, my state has pulled me in to work and support and also be a person on the girls committee to give my input and my information. So we have to start not just looking at national team members to come in, but look at who's local for you and get them involved in your sport. I think that's really important. So creating a great place for our women to see themselves in the sport instead of just viewing themselves, well, I was a competitor, I wrestled, but I was never asked to come in and be a part of the organization of creating the leadership and creating more opportunities for young girls. So I think those are some things that our state leaders could definitely do.
The intentionality that you're talking about, right? Our leaders need to be intentional about how we promote girls wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
Our coaches need to be intentional that we're stressing the skills and trying to get girl on girl competition as much as we can to be able to launch. It's intentional. The growth of our sport, the growth of women's wrestling right now has been intentional, and in large part the work that you two have done to help provide these resources. What are these resources? What are these tools if I want to bring you into my state and put you in front of my board? If I haven't had a chance to come out to the Leaders Summit and hear you speak, because I know you guys are on that agenda every year, it's so important. What can I do to reach out to you or to other leaders in women's wrestling so that I can be more intentional on how I promote this and market this and coach this?
Joan, and the work that we do, you know, we're happy to come and in the current climate, certainly we could do it, you know, online with Zoom if that's necessary. We have been invited to several states to come and do presentations, and you know, a lot of our, you know, what we're providing right now and have been and will continue to stay focused on is, you know, we try to research, education, information. We've been very focused in the last couple of years on what is the national landscape, what's the regional landscape, what's happening in each state. We do the best we can to do outreach with either state associations or USA Wrestling executive directors or women's directors. We try to have contacts in the state to understand what's happening in that state, and we try to compile all that information to make useful, you know, resources, whether it's slide decks or, you know, presentation or PDFs or whatever, so that they can use that information in any way they want to their benefit, to their goals with girls and women's wrestling in their state. So we've done a variety of things, but trying to educate and inform is really our biggest mission. And so you can USA Wrestling's website, there's a women's wrestling tab, and you can find our information there. We are going to, some of the material there is a little outdated. We are working with USA Wrestling to update that material. And then, you know, I think it's really important that if people are interested in growing girls wrestling or they want to do more, I think you need to look to our national organizations, USA Wrestling, National Wrestling Hall of Fame, National Wrestling Coaches Association, Wrestle Like a Girl, Lucha Fit, Transition Wrestling. What's really great right now is we have a lot of women starting organizations to support girls and women's in wrestling. And so those are becoming great resources for people to reach out to. And those can all be found online. But, you know, also just going back to what Joan said, we have people in every state that are doing outstanding work with girls and women in wrestling, recruiting and building teams, coaching, you know, leadership with girls, you know, staying local or traveling or whatever. So we have, never forget to look just, you know, within your own state. You can always reach out at the high school level. You can reach out to your state athletic association. Obviously with USA Wrestling, you can contact your state chapter, or, you know, find Joan and I, or find Mike, and, you know, we'll always work to get the right information.
We have 4 probably, you know, main document slide decks right now that people can use, whether they're doing a presentation or work with us, and we can recreate any presentation that they need that's specific to their state or their situation, or whether they're addressing athletic directors, state executives at in the interscholastic level, or just grassroots people. But One Courageous Girl that Andrea wrote, fantastic coach's guide when that first girl walks in the room. Starting a girls' high school wrestling program. So it's a toolkit of ideas, starting whether it's just at your school and going through your section, region, districts, however your state is set up to create that program for girls. We have high school participation data, which still tends to be one of the most sought after pieces of information about the growth, and just the growth over whether it's 5 years or 10 years or just in the last 2 years, what high schools are doing, weight charts, et cetera. We have all that put together. And then Andrea put together a great national summary. So we went through the NFHS regions and the colleges that are associated within those regions, and then the states that have that championship. It's all listed in this document. I think it's about 15 pages. So it's a lot of research and a lot of information there, but that's a great piece of information. So those are the 4 main slide decks and documents that we have out there right now that, you know, we could, you know, surely tie that into to this Zoom presentation so they could reach to that. Yeah.
And Joan and I are always available to discuss girls and women's wrestling, you know, on any topic. It may be something as simple as I'm a male coach and I want to have a girls team, but I'm really hesitant to show technique on a girl, and how do I do? We can talk about that. I've been a female athlete in wrestling where I've had nothing but male coaches. I've been a high school coach and youth coach where I have had male and female, you know, students and athletes that I've had to work through. You know, how are we gonna make sure everyone's comfortable? What are the steps that I use to do that? And I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of what Joan and I do is just provide reassurance that probably some of the things that they're thinking about are good things to be thinking about, and what are just some very easy common sense things that they can use to kind of start moving forward. What my experience has been, once we get over some of these mental hurdles, right? And they're just hurdles. They're not mountains. I think that's really important for anyone that is listening to us right now. Realize that any hesitancies that you may have about starting a team, or showing technique, or coaching girls, or dealing with girls, these are hurdles. You're up and over really fast, and you get going and you realize that motivating athletes is the same no matter whether it's a boy or a girl. Training is training, wrestling skills are wrestling skills, and that, you know, coaching and teaching is not a one size fits all, and that, you know, coaches should feel really comfortable this is a great area for them to expand how they teach, how they mentor, how they recruit. There's so many possibilities here, and Joan and I are willing to talk about any subject with wrestling. It doesn't have to be just about, you know, the data and the numbers. And I know the other women, Wrestle Like a Girl, Lucha Fit, Transition Wrestling, and any of the others out there that I apologize if I'm missing, they're willing to have those conversations as well. And you know, if I'm that coach that maybe has some old thinking or some whatever, it's okay to have those conversations with us. We are safe, uncritical, unjudgmental. The goal is to help them move beyond that. The goal is not to persecute for why don't you love girls wrestling and why haven't you got on board. It's a process. We have to work through those. We can't shy away from that. And so all the resources out there, you can call us, we can just talk, you can vent about how things are going in your state and growing, because there's some tough times, and we're available for, and if we can't answer that question, we're willing to reach out and connect them with someone who can answer those, and, you know, create some partnerships there. And so people should just feel free to reach out.
We are changing hearts and minds.
but we still have a lot of hearts and minds to go in those coaches, athletic directors, and administrators, but it's happening.
We've got a lot of hearts and minds out there that appreciate all the love and the effort that you've put into this truly worthy donation of your time and energy to our sport, and on purpose, intentionally, with the opportunity to just say, hey, we're not going to steal dreams from young gals out there. We're going to make sure that we're supporting the dreams of all people that want to do it through this tool that we use as a sport of wrestling. So there isn't enough thanks to be able to share with you guys. So we'll say thank you, and we'll let our members know that there's some great movement for opportunity right now in our wrestling community. And two of the folks that have really stepped up for that are here with us today. So Joan and Andrea, thank you so much for your time. For all of us on USA Wrestling's Moments Off the Mat, thanks so much for what you do. Support women's wrestling, and it's the right thing to do. Any closing remarks from the two of you?
No, thank you, Mike. We appreciate working with USA
so
Wrestling, and all the support USA Wrestling has given to us has really provided that avenue for us to reach out and work with NFHS executive directors, several years in a row, and rules committee. So we just give a great thanks to USA Wrestling for the support they continue to give us.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Take care, everybody.